Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have 3 stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So, if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now, let's get into the stories. I used to be skeptical of stories like these cryptids, aliens, conspiracies in general. It all seemed like a bunch of nut jobs or people just desperate for attention. Well, after the events of the last few weeks, I've reconsidered. I live in a small town in Pennsylvania called Marcus Hook, but I grew up here and I went to college in Philadelphia. My parents moved to Florida a few months ago, but they're keeping their house here, and I'm living in it right now. It's right on the bank of the Delaware River. For the first few months, it was pretty cool. A 22-year-old guy with his own house is a pretty big deal. But at first, I was stupid, and I threw a ton of parties, and I always had my friends over. But after summer ended and people started going back to school or finding real jobs, it all began to wind down. I was okay with that. I needed some time for peace and quiet anyway. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. The river was just maybe 20 yards from the back door of the house. I worked odd hours at my new job, and I found myself staying up later and later. I was bored and with nobody else to hang out with besides my dog, Sprint. I started fishing in the river like I did when I was a kid. I wouldn't eat anything from the water, but catching catfish using pepperoni pieces was a novelty. And most nights I would wind up outside in a lawn chair until 3 in the morning. It was on a night like this when the first incident happened. I wasn't paying too much attention. I was watching something on my phone and my rod started bouncing around like crazy. I jumped up to set the hook, jerking it back. The line went slack for a second and then jerked away. I figured I had a fish on, but when I tried to reel again, it wouldn't budge. I thought maybe I was snagged, but then the line snapped away again. I'm not an expert fisherman, but the way the line moved was odd. Not like a typical fish bite, but like something in the water was purposely pulling back on the line each time I did. Almost like it was intelligent. I was a little freaked out, and I ended up just cutting the line and heading back inside. I told myself it was caught on a snag or something, but I suspected otherwise. A week later, another incident. I had fallen asleep in my chair, and I woke up startled after hearing a large splash in the water just a few yards out. The light from my back porch just barely hit the edge of the water, and I could see a series of rings spreading out from where something had entered the water. A new set of rings then appeared a few feet away, and then again and again until they were out of sight. I was a little baffled, as catfish are bottom feeders and such. They seldom come to the surface of the water, and they rarely jump. I grabbed my gear and I headed inside, but in my groggy state, I left my cutting board, knife, and a fresh bag of pepperoni sitting on the ground outside. The next day, I realized what I had done, and I went outside to retrieve it. It was all gone. In the patchy dirt near where I had left the stuff, I could see faint prints. Some kind of thin-footed animal with only 2 long, slender toes had been walking through the area. Also, I found silvery fish scales that were spread sporadically around, and both the prints and the scales led straight back to the water's edge. I must admit that at this point I was a little bugged out. I didn't know what to make of the evidence, but I figured that any kind of call to the police was going to get me laughed at. I tried to find information on the prints online, but no luck. I decided that I would give fishing a rest for a while. I needed to get better sleep anyway. I was starting to get tired halfway through the day at work, so 2 weeks went by and I hadn't been back outside to fish. And then I started dating a new girl, Ruth, and between her and work, I pretty much forgot all about the tracks. And then the most bizarre incident of all occurred. I was fast asleep in the room upstairs when I was shaken awake by my new girlfriend. She told me that Sprint was downstairs barking like crazy. I'm a heavy sleeper and probably wouldn't have noticed, but sure enough, he was downstairs going nuts. Before I reached the stairs, his barking abruptly cut off, and then it turned into a low growl. I felt a small twinge of panic. Ruth was behind me on the stairs, and we crept down quietly. I could see Sprint standing at the back door, rigid posture, growling at something outside. I walked quietly over to him, and I tried to calm him down. I was stroking his head when I heard Ruth let out a gasp. She was looking through the small window of the back door. I stood up to look myself, and that small twinge of panic turned into a hammering. 2 bipedal creatures no more than 3 feet tall were treading around my backyard. It was dark and the lights were off, but I could make out a pallid silver color to them. No eyes that I could see, but something like a fin was running along the spine of each creature. We stood frozen for a few moments watching these 2 creatures. At one point, they ambled over to each other, and I swear to God they were making hand gestures towards the house. Ruth saw this too and whispered that she was going to call the cops, and then she ran upstairs to grab her phone. I stayed and watched for a few more minutes. Sprint took up his barking again, and this time both creatures just ambled away towards the river and disappeared under the water. The police came about 20 minutes later and looked around. They didn't see any sign of the creatures, but said that they had found some wet prints outside. They were the exact same ones that I had seen on the ground a few weeks ago. Since no crime was committed, they didn't seem too interested, but the officers took my report and told me to call again if anything else happened. So this was a week ago. I've looked online for any kind of information on these creatures, but I can't find anything. I haven't gotten a good night's sleep since, and Ruth has refused to come back to the house. Does anybody out there know what these things are? And if you do, are they dangerous? When I think back to the day that I saw this, I start to question myself. I think it's normal to try and rationalize things because you know other people won't believe you. And I know someone out there is probably thinking, well, if you can't be sure what you saw, how is anyone else supposed to believe what you're saying? I guess you don't really know what to think or believe when you've been in a situation like this. I'll be honest, I'm not a diehard skeptic, but I wasn't ever a true believer of things like Bigfoot or whatever either. So when I saw what I think I did, my first instinct was always to find a logical explanation for it. But it doesn't always explain everything away. I'll try to explain the events the best I can. I know there will be things to question, but try your best to put yourself in my shoes as I tell it. I remember the day was very windy. There was a carnival in town, and it was the final day that it would be available to the public. I had promised my niece and nephew that I would take them since I hadn't been able to spend much time with them that month. They were still pretty young. I'd say my niece was about 6 and my nephew about 8. I remember thinking, I hope the wind isn't too much for them. Both of them had been very afraid of storms when they were growing up. I didn't want them to be afraid of the wind. I was worried it would ruin their time at the carnival. But we didn't have any other option. It was the last day, and that's where they wanted to go. I did bring some activities for the car ride, but I thought that if things got really bad with the wind and all, we could just wait it out in my car. I had one of those station wagons, so the back was big and spacious. I even brought extra blankets and snacks. Anyway, I hadn't picked them up yet, but was on my way, so I had my window down. I genuinely liked the wind and the rain. It always smelled fresh to me. I mean, compared to the station wagon, everything smelled much, much cleaner. But as I was driving along the road, I started to hear this weird, high-pitched screeching. At first, I just thought it was somebody's brakes, but the sound stayed very much the same, even as I passed by different cars. So then I started thinking, the sound has to be my brakes. So then I started listening every time I hit the brakes. But it didn't seem to be mine either. And that's when I realized that the sound wasn't coming from the area of the road. It was actually coming from the trees off to my left. It probably wouldn't have bothered me if the sound wasn't so disturbing and different. And it just kept happening over and over again. So then I thought, maybe it's a goose or something that got injured in the wind. Right? That would make sense. Geese make noises like that, right? So I'm doing my best to look out the window as I'm driving, but now moving at a relatively slow pace. I didn't see any geese in the sky or the trees, so now I'm really confused. But that's when I did notice something moving along the base of the trees. It's going to sound stupid, but at first I thought I saw a llama running through the trees. So my mind starts thinking about the carnival and this thing that looks like a llama. I even had a light bulb moment where I'm like, the llama escaped the petting zoo at the carnival. That made the most amount of sense. Maybe the llama got loose because the wind had been so wild. Maybe the gate broke. Maybe somebody had accidentally let it out. I know it was absurd, but at least it was logical. So I'm starting to feel okay about it all. I should have felt bad for the llama, but I didn't really think beyond any of that. I felt bad admitting it, but I didn't really care about the llama. I was just happy that it explained the screeching to me. So I'm still driving, but then I continued to hear the weird screeching. But then I was like, whatever, at this point. And that's when I noticed the car ahead of me stomp on their brakes. So of course, I jump on mine. The person in the car gets out of their vehicle and they start looking out towards where I saw the llama. So I'm like, great, now everybody's going to stop to look at this llama on the side of the road. And then they all start pointing, and somebody else gets out of the car. I'm watching all of this and I'm trying to figure out what they're saying, trying to read their lips. And that's when they start to point higher. So I wonder what they're doing, and then I look in the direction they're pointing and I see the llama, like, hovering in the trees. And then it's gone, just like that. And with that, the screeching stops. Like everything that was happening moments before is just done. It all ceases. So now I'm thinking, did the llama just fly away? And sure enough, I hear the people in front of me shouting something about wings. Now, I didn't see any wings, but wings would be a good explanation for what happened. I don't know if they thought they saw the llama with some wings or if some winged thing grabbed the llama. I really can't explain any of that. All I know is that I saw something that resembled a llama. It was clearly distressed, and then it disappeared. As far as I know, it was only the car in front of me who also witnessed exactly what I had. I did eventually try to pull up to the side of their vehicle to talk to them, but they looked like they really didn't want to talk to me. They even looked kind of shook up, so I decided to just continue on. I guess I don't have much of a story, but I wanted to share this with you nonetheless. All I can think is that I'm just glad that my niece and nephew weren't in the car with me. If they had been, I would really be trying to figure out an explanation. I've heard stories like these, but I never thought it would happen to me, especially since I live in the suburbs. I mean, stuff like this is supposed to happen in isolated areas, right? I guess it can happen anywhere. I don't know now. It was late at night, everyone was asleep besides me and my dog Ollie. It was a Friday night and I stayed up to relax from work. I was just watching TV, really, flipping through the channels, nothing really in particular. I ended up staying on some sitcom, I think, until Ollie started acting weird. At first, he just raised his head a few times, looking at the window and the door. After a while, though, he started to growl, and then he got up and started pacing. Something was outside, and he wasn't very happy about it. His hair was standing on end, and he wouldn't stop even when I told him to quiet down. I didn't want him to get hurt, so I put him in his crate, and I put my shoes and jacket on. It was November, a week before Thanksgiving, so it was pretty chilly, and there was some light snow on the ground. I turned on one of the outdoor lights, and I headed outside. I didn't hear anything at first. The wind was starting to pick up, though, and I first thought it was just leaves blowing around. Something, though, made me feel weird. I can't really describe it. So I picked up a shovel that was leaning against the house. I had to use it a few days before to dig up the flower beds. At first I thought I was being stupid. You're in your own backyard, what are you doing? I looked around the garage, the deck, and along the fence line. I didn't see anything. It wasn't until I walked back towards the back door that movement caught my eye. Just a shadow at first. I don't know. I look up towards the roof and start walking back a little to get a better look. And that's when I see it. trying to hide itself by the chimney and gripping the roof, trying to make itself look small as possible. The thing was short, maybe 4 feet or 4.5. It was hard to tell because it was on all fours, but its legs and arms were long and skinny. It seemed to have some sort of nails or claws. It was hard to tell. They were dug in pretty good. It was its face, though. That's what I still dream about the most. It was pale, and the whole thing really was like a chalky white-gray, maybe more gray than white. It was dark out, but this thing was pretty light, and its head seemed big, but maybe that's because its body was so thin. And its eyes were huge, and they kind of glowed with the light that they caught, like a dog's or a cat's will do. It had slits for a nose, and its mouth was kind of trembling at first. But when it opened to hiss at me, I could see sharp teeth. I think its tongue was pointed. It shot out a little when it hissed. I didn't know what to think or do at first, but when it started moving, I remembered the shovel in my hands. I just held it up at first, but the thing kept moving, so then I started swinging it at the edge of the roof. The thing moved like a cat, very nimble and pretty fast too. I thought maybe I could reach it if I was up on the deck, so I run up the stairs, and this thing is staring right at me. I swing the shovel again, and at first it backed up and moved out of the way a bit. But when I swung maybe the 3rd time, it reached out and slapped the blade of the shovel, knocking it back and hissing. I didn't want it to leap down on top of me. Something in my head was screaming at me that would be extremely bad. So I recover as best as I can, and I start to jab the blade of the shovel at it now. That's when it smacked the shovel again, hard enough that I lost my balance and came crashing to the deck. The shovel was now too far away for me to reach it. It had fallen to the deck and bounced away from where I fell. I just closed my eyes and I waited for this thing to drop down on me. It never did, though. I then opened my eyes back up, got up, and there was nothing on the roof. It seemed to be gone. I didn't want to chance it, though. I don't know if my adrenaline was just pumping out of control or what, but I go into the garage and I get a ladder. I also grabbed a hatchet, and I put the ladder against the roof and climbed up. I searched the entire roof. I looked at my neighbors' roofs. There was nothing. I woke up my wife in the process, and she was extremely confused and concerned. I came down, put the ladder and the hatchet away, and then came inside. I made sure everything was locked up tight, and then I told her the story. She said she believed me, but I wasn't sure. Not until the next day. It was hard to sleep, and I got only maybe 2 hours. Not really sure. I then went back out in the morning, and I went back up on the roof to look around in the daylight. And that's when I saw them. There was a group of shingles that had deep gouges in them, like claw marks, near and around the chimney. I pulled those free and brought them back down to show my wife. That really seemed to sink into her mind, because the look she gave me was something else. I don't know what I saw or what I tried to fight off. I replaced the shingles, and I've stayed up a few nights. It's hard to sleep now. The thing hasn't come back, though, and I don't know if it will. If it wasn't for Ollie, I don't know if we would be alive.